So I'll start by introducing our moderator for this afternoon's panel, and this is Doug Haddon. Doug Haddon is the Executive Vice President of Innovation at FreeBalance. Lots of Doug's work and research relates to how technology can be used in a smart fashion to help governments improve things like good governance, accountability, and transparency, and how in the grand scheme of things, those really relate to the concepts that we're discussing here today about happiness and well-being. And so joining Doug on today's panel is Dr. Saamdu Chetri. Dr. Chetri is the director of the Gross National Happiness Center in Bhutan. Dr. Chetri has several years' experience in socio-economic development, working as the Bhutanese head for bilateral development agencies at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and Helvetas. In 2012, Dr. Chetri was given the heroic task of developing, building, and instituting a Center for Gross National Happiness in Bhutan. Welcome, Dr. Chetri.
Thank you.
Dr. Carrie Exton is a policy analyst at the OECD Statistics Directorate, where she focuses her research on measuring well-being and happiness for the Better Life Index and promoting the Better Life Initiative. Dr. Ruut Veenhoven, sociologist and a pioneer in the scientific study of happiness in the sense of subjective enjoyment of life. His work on the social conditions for human happiness at Erasmus University in Rotterdam has contributed to a renewed interest in happiness as an aim for public policy. Dr. Veenhoven has shown that happiness can be used as a reliable measure to assess progress in societies, which was one of the sources of inspiration for the UN to adopt happiness measures as a holistic approach to development. And finally, Laura Musikanski is Executive Director and co-founder of the Happiness Initiative. Prior to that, she was the Executive Director of Sustainable Seattle and Sustainability Director for a national firm. She has focused her career on sustainability indicators with the passionate belief that you get what you measure, and believes that it's time to measure and manage for the well-being of people and the planet. So welcome to all our panelists, and I'll give the floor to them.
Thanks, Matthew. Hi. I've got all sorts of skill testing questions because I can imagine that everyone, like me, as we hear the various speakers, we tend to get more questions than we get answers. I can. Generally speaking, people ask me to do the opposite. Thank you very much. It's made me very happy very quickly. So Dr. Chetri, one of the things I was interested in from a public policy perspective is when you introduced the notion of happiness in public policy in Bhutan, did that complicate or did that simplify the creation of policy?
You want me to answer this or?
Sure.
Okay, shall I go there?
I think you can take that or you can use it.
Oh, yeah, it works.
It works.
Sorry, I'm mic'd. Well, I think the first thing that we need to understand is that Bhutan was and is in a very different situation. We were never colonized at any point of time, and Bhutan opened to the world very, very late, in 1960s only. And so we had the choices to make from the mistakes of other countries. That's how we started our development path. And I would say that the policy has been created not only top down, but is also bottom up. It's a mixture of both. Both have worked together to create this philosophy of gross national happiness. The concept is as old as 1729. Of course, in human history is as old as the human beings themselves. But in Bhutan, back in 1729, it was in the legal code that if government cannot create, the word was used as create, happiness and well-being for its people, then there is no need for government to exist. That's how it starts. And we've been lucky to have kings with such visions, and who have been serving us for until the fourth king, until he decided at a young age of 52 to say, now I'm old, I give my throne to my son. And he resigned at the height of his popularity. And he gave us democracy, saying that, I cannot assure you that all along you had good kings, but I can't assure you for future. So it's time now that you take the governance in your hands. That's how he gave us the democracy. And we always thought, wow, now it's going to change like India, Bangladesh, or Nepal, And we were so fearing, in fact. But we realized when the elections took place, there was no change at all. So for 30 years, he had been devolving power, preparing with the people, going down to the grassroots, asking them, how can I make you happy? How do I bring happiness to you? And I think he realized that he needs to give more power to the people, give power for them to decide for themselves. And that's how the whole process began back. And even today, our entire planning process takes bottom up.
Wonderful. So you have a presentation that you'd like to give? Or
Yeah.
a speech? Sure.
Yeah, sure. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Segue that into that.
I might have to refer to my notes. Well, good afternoon. After this hearty lunch, I'm sure all of us are a bit tired. Listening is not very easy in life. It's one of the biggest challenges we all face. But, Shri Ravi Shankarji is not here. When he said that he failed in physics, I was kind of very happy because I failed the whole class. And I thought I did better than him. Happiness is very dangerous. You know why? Because it's very contagious. And Thich Nhat Hanh, often we quote him, said that the way to happiness is the way. And I imagine that happiness is not a means to anything, but is an end by itself. So I would like to ask 3 questions. If you participate with me, just say yes or no. Is that okay? Would you like to be happy?
Yes.
Do you think others like to be happy?
Yes.
Do you think others want you to be happy?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's great. Because often on the 3rd question, when I ask, do you think others want you to be happy? There's a lot of silence. Because we have lost trust in humanity altogether. Well, approximately 60 years ago, the ecology or the nature was encompassing everything, within which was the society, and within that small society was the economics. Today, economics has encompassed us, within which is the society, and within the society is that small ecology. This is all due to so-called economic growth or development that has no threshold. Anything is development, for that matter. So because of our greed, today we land in 3 divides, or rather 4 divides. The 3 divides we say is ecological divide, where today we are consuming 1.5 times the biocapacity of our earth. It's like yesterday I was giving this example. It's like asking a mother, you have to give 1.5 births in 1 year. Maybe the technology and the science today can manage that, but is that sustainable, is the question. Exactly that's what we are doing with our earth, planet Earth. If you look into, we complain so much about population growth. But if you see, we rear 1 trillion animal, 1,000 billion animal on this planet and slaughter 700 billion every year for the greed of 7.5 billion people. I mean, if we use this 80% of arable land to grow food, we can have 30 billion people and we can just grow 1 time in a year to last for 10 years. That's the kind of simple statistics, If you look into how we are doing with our fossil fuels and our excavation from the earth, we're using 400 years of Earth's hard work in creating this fossil fuel we are burning in just 1 year. And we're doing massive minings all over. For whom? Is it for us or for generations to come? A big question to be asked. If it is for generations to come, will it last until they are there on this planet? A big question. And because of our greed, and definitely there are a lot of examples that I can give you, because of our greed, now the global warming is a reality. The Arctic ice has broken. The glaciers, which is the 3rd ice cap on Earth, is melting at a fast speed, whether it's in Himalayas, Alps, Urals, Rockies, or Andes, or you name any mountains. It's really massively degenerating. 3 months ago, we did a study on snow leopards, and we found only 100 snow leopards are living on the mountains of Bhutan, simply because they cannot follow the snow. If they follow, they'll miss the food chain. So they try to adapt below the snow line and they die. Simple as that. The second one is the economic divide. And that is, I think that was also referred, if you see today that 20% of the global population, that's about 1.4 billion people, take away 75% of the income and consume 77% of the global production. The same number of people consume less than 2% of the global production and take away less than 5% of the global income. So where is the reality of our existence? I think what we need to think about beyond us, beyond the happiness, we always ask, we want to be happy. We always say, let's try to gear for happiness. But we never ask, why do we want to go for happiness? I think that should be also a question we should ask ourselves. Why do we want happiness? I think we'll have much more answers to ourselves. Now the reality of economic divide is so large that we don't have, many countries try to keep the prices of things by dumping things that they produce. Even US, for an example, you produce a lot of rice, and if you don't want the prices to go low, you just dump large part of it into the sea to feed the animals in the sea. By the way, of course, animals in the sea give us 80% of oxygen, and that we claim, we ourselves as human beings, is all due to the interdependence. 2/3 of us is water, and the rest is food and air that we constitute of. So we are not what we call ourselves as we are beyond we. If we learn to live with interdependence, then we become a better human beings, and we don't need to search happiness, because happiness will come behind us, because we are a part of the interdependence. The third divide is the societal divide. Today we fear, if you greet anybody on the street, hello, good morning, good afternoon, often you get a resistance. They fear, kind of, what does this guy really want from me? So we have lost this human, nature in all of us. If you look into what is happening on Earth, 96 million horrendous crimes take place, of which 1 million is a suicide, 1 million rape, about 16 million divorces take place. We live in a very paradoxical world, actually. The Child Rights Act, the Marriage Act, tells us how to behave with our children and how to behave with our spouses. Is this not paradoxical? It is. It is. And why are we tend to have more and more laws, regulations, act on this earth is simply because we have lost our values. And the values that we refer to are very simple. Values that starts with love and ends with trust. There are about 10 values, human values, and they are across in all cultures, all religions, you name it. So we need to, I think, change our whole concept of living. And as I say, we are trying to do this through the Educating GNH, that's the term that we use. And Mind and Life in Boston tried to start with actually calling for care. And they did give us an assignment, and we tried for a year, and it does bring a huge, tremendous change. Now this has been picked up by Vietnam, and in the city of Hue, 30 million children are already being addressed through this process of calling for care. And it does work. And this calling for care is so simple. It tells you how you take care of yourself, your parents, your friends, your families, and the environment around you. Well, money has been often associated with life satisfaction, and I think, in fact, the Gallup poll has done that, the happiness index would have done that. But I think you realize suddenly that there is a correlation up to a certain extent. Beyond that, it just flattens. There's no return after that. And if you see Denmark, for example, is on the top according to the World Happiness Report. Switzerland was first last year, but now it's taken again back by Denmark. And Denmark has the highest suicide rates, or at least very high suicide rate in the world. And why does that happen? So it's not necessarily the income, and Switzerland has much higher income than Denmark, of course, per GDP per capita. But I think it's much to do with other things. That's community trust, the self-governance, the choices that you make, the freedom that we have. Some of this, the relationship, I think, is proven even by, not by subjectiveness that we often associate ourselves with, saying that relationship is everything, but it's also proven by Harvard. Last year, around March, the fourth director on the research gave to the world that they've been having a group of youngsters since 75 years who have now, few of them have died, few of them are still living, and they've been tracing their entire life to see what actually, if you had to deduct one indicator for happiness, what would that be? And they realize it's a relationship. And that's what is missing on the planet today very, very much. So, the other thing that Bhutan also tried looking at is the measures were not there with us. We knew that we need to be happy, and the kings tried to bring those kind of happiness by creating conditions for us. They said, okay, large part of your conditions you have to have your own efforts. Some part it's a community effort, some part it's a government's effort. Not everything government gives you, like what somebody referred this morning. It's not the duty of the government, or it was President Fox. It's not duty of the government, it's duty of every individual. Today we blame the whole country, the government, the people around, but we don't tend to change ourselves. The moment we transform, we'll have a better world, because we can then bring the change in others as well. So the world, after it was spoken in 1998 in Seoul in the UN summit about happiness, because the UN wanted that, the world climbed onto us and said, but how do you measure this? Why do you say this is better than GDP? And so the world came and helped us bring measures. And so we have 4 pillars, 9 domains, 33 indicators, 124 variables to measure. Today we can do it, we can interview a person in less than an hour because they are all computerized. But when we began, it took 6 hours to interview a person, and that was not happiness by far. So we do have the survey results of 2010 and 2015 that also indicates, how different domains behave with the increase of one of the 9 domains. So the government actually promised 6 things to the people of Bhutan: road to every house, electricity to every house, drinking water to every house, education for all, health for all, and the other one was telecommunication facilities to every corner of the country. So all the 6 promises were met. And of course the 2010 survey was in between the first democratic government, and 2015 happened to be in the second democratic government, which the government actually changed. It went to a different party. And now when these 2 times are measured and compared, we suddenly see the psychological well-being going down because the living standards have gone up, the GDP has increased, so psychological well-being has gone down, and community vitality has gone down. And the reason being that, people who have lived for generations together as community suddenly felt that difference. The rich could immediately afford to buy a car, go for the latest gadgets and mobiles, appliances at home. And so, people who generally contributed for the common cause, who gave their time and money, stopped doing that. They wanted to now save money to also compete with the other richer guys. So suddenly there was this difference, and there was this fear factor, there was this jealousy, there was this anger, a lot of things started to come back. So now what the government has decided is to have these 9 domains brought into our 12th 5-year plan. That's going to be from mid of 2018, sorry. And we're going to have all these domains related to our development key indicators as well. Coming to the definition of happiness, which I should have done already, actually happiness that's we define is not this fleeting momentary pleasure, feel-good moods, that often we associate ourselves with. It's much more to do. Happiness comes from a term called deki, actually, in our language, and it has 3 components. Is to serve others, to live in harmony with nature, and to realize your own innate wisdoms and values. These three things contribute to the happiness that we often associate with the term GNH. So we don't, and as it was told already in the morning, happiness is a very subjective thing. You know, you can be happy in the morning, you can be happy in the next 1 minute, you can be unhappy. But I think Lord Buddha did say that, you know, if we have few things in our minds, and as everybody knows that happiness is inward, not outward. You might be happy with something that you desire for, and then when that is over, the happiness is over. But this is not the lasting happiness we speak of. We must learn to do three things: not compete each other, not complain, and not compare. So three things if we can do, then we will automatically get into the first step of trying to accept things as they are and let things go. And if we are able to do this, we can find happiness within. We don't have to look for happiness outside. In whatever situation you are, in whatever times you are, you can always be happy. You can always be happy. I remember a small incident not long ago, about 10 days ago, we were flying back from Delhi to Bhutan, and suddenly because of the weather, the plane couldn't land in Bhutan, and it went back to the nearest port in India. And everybody was so anxious, so jittery, so angry why they couldn't land. And I just got up and said, let's meditate. And we began meditating. And I brought happiness in the face of everybody. So it's really not, when you try to live in the past, like Dalai Lama or Buddha said that, you know, there are 2 days that we can't control or don't have control over. That's yesterday and tomorrow. But today we have. So if we learn to do our things as they are today and also contribute a stone towards tomorrow, I think tomorrow will come to us and come in a much happier way than that we think. So I would like to conclude by saying that if we can generate these values of love and compassion, kindness, loyalty, dedication in our own ways of life, we would learn to self-rule ourselves, and as well as we shift from the paradigm of ego to eco. So, you know, today we live as we are human beings, and if you consider in the planet, the space for human beings is only 1% of the entire space, but we have taken over 30% of the entire space of the globe. And so we feel that we are on top of everything. Nature is there to serve us. That's how we feel. But if you look into the reality that nature, we are a part of the nature, and that's what I said when I said we are constituting of 6,000 billion organisms and cells, of which only 6 billion cells belong to human cells. The rest of them are all organisms, either from water or food we eat. So when we are distressed and very anxious or very depressed, we can go to the ocean side or to the mountains or to the rivers or to the forest, and you have immediately a calming effect because your 5,994 billion organisms quickly connect with them. And often when you shift your place from your country to another country and the food changes, you tend to suffer a little bit because your organisms are used to your place and not this place, so they take a little time. So if we can change our concept of being egoist, being very selfish, being very competitive, being very shrewd, to very collaborative, very cooperative, if we can change that paradigm shift and become a part of the interdependence, I think we'll have a happier world to live for our generations to come. So sustainability is not for us and not for this time, it is for all generations to come. And that's how we must look forward in our lives with the money and the economy that we often associate with growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I can see that you're prepared with some notes. Would you prefer an ambush question, or would you like to go through with it?
I have a presentation, so I could do that first and then cover any questions
Sure,
afterwards.
that'd be fine.
Yeah, okay. I have some slides that will hopefully come up. So, there will be some slides magically appearing. On their way, brilliant. So just by brief way of introduction, I work for the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We have 35 member countries, and broadly speaking, we are a forum for exchange of ideas on how to govern countries and how to make lives better for people. So my main objective today, I want to talk about how we turn this concept of happiness into something very concrete and something that can be applied in public policy. I think it's been noted with a couple of different presentations that actually what we're talking about with happiness is really quite different to where we are at the moment in terms of public priorities and the way that governments think about their jobs. So we've got quite a gap to fill in terms of where we are now and where we want to be with the happiness agenda. And what I'm going to present when my slides magically appear is essentially the OECD aim to fill that gap. Okay. The reason this is challenging is that it takes us back to a fundamental question around what makes for a good life. And this is difficult stuff. Arguably, some might say it's best left to the philosophers. But the challenge is that governments implicitly answer this question every time they spend money. So we can't leave this in the hands of just economists who tend to be the ones who are advising governments on how to spend that money. There needs to be a much broader dialogue around what makes for a good life. Now, trade-offs are inevitable when resources are scarce. And let's be clear, in government, resources are always scarce. So you're always making trade-offs in terms of where you allocate your resources. So one of the goals of our work on wellbeing is to try and help governments make the choices more explicit. So to try and prepare the evidence that means governments understand when they make a choice to invest in one area, what impact that has on people's wellbeing. So we're trying to develop a framework through which we can understand how you get better policies for better lives. In 2011, the OECD got a new mission statement, and that new mission statement was better policies for better lives. That all sounds great, and it's very easy to make promises about raising people's well-being and increasing people's happiness. We really have to make it concrete in order to hold people to account for those promises. It's very easy to say we need to provide a mechanism by which people can actually do it. The other thing to say is that we need an agreed definition and measurement that actually speaks to people's realities. So on the one hand, we need to connect with individuals, with communities, with voters, in terms of speaking to their reality, how they feel life is going. But it's also really important that we speak to the reality of policymakers. And the reality of policymakers at the moment is still this number, GDP. We've heard a lot about it already, but I do want to reiterate that this is front of center for most OECD governments, and what they want to know from us as an organization is, how do I boost this number? That is still a live issue, and it matters. It matters because it's associated with jobs, it matters because it's associated with paying you your pension, and it matters because it's also associated with tax revenue and therefore public money. So the spending that governments can do relates to this number. So this number is still very much the reality that policymakers are facing. Of course, we know that as a measure of welfare, of how lives are going for people, GDP has its limits. It fails to show any information about the distribution of the benefits of growth across society. It, of course, doesn't speak to the issue of sustainability and whether or not growth is achieved in an environmentally friendly way. There are a range of issues that GDP simply cannot capture. So things that people value, like their social relationships, those aren't traded in markets, they don't come with prices, we can't count them as part of our GDP figures. So it's definitely very inadequate as a measure of people's welfare and as a measure of people's well-being. So we need something that bridges the gap between this number here, GDP, and this concept of happiness. And this takes us into uncharted waters. So what the OECD is trying to do is offer a stepping stone, if you like, a way to try and capture well-being, this better lives thing, that relates to the reality that policymakers face at the moment, but also relates to the reality that people feel on the ground. So trying to capture what makes life good for people. Now, this is the framework that we've developed, and I have to say we really can't take credit for this framework in the sense that it's a product of a consensus process around what various different approaches to thinking of this concept of well-being and happiness, the various different components that they've come up with, we've kind of brought them all together in a framework. So this is a product of a lot of philosophical thinking, but also a lot of economic thinking, and it also reflects a lot of the initiatives that are happening across OECD countries to try and measure well-being and happiness. So what do I need to tell you? First of all, you can see there are two big components in this framework. The first is individual well-being today. So this is current well-being here and now, and it's measured at the sort of individual and community level. In the bottom half of the framework, we can see sustainability of well-being over time. And this is about having the resources for future well-being, making sure that the different capital stocks that fuel well-being, that drive well-being, are actually preserved for future generations. So there's two components. There's how people are feeling here and now, and the sustainability of well-being over time. As you can see, it incorporates many of the things that governments already care about and they already spend money on. But there's also a few new things in there that governments typically don't have front and centre. So on material conditions, we've got classic measures like income and wealth, measures that tackle issues of jobs and earnings and also housing. On quality of life, we've got a range of different dimensions, so things like health status, work and life balance, education and skills, civic engagement and governance, social connections, environmental quality, personal security, and of course, subjective well-being. When it comes to the resources that sustain well-being over time, we look at 4 different types of capital stocks. So we're looking at natural capital, natural resources, we're looking at economic capital, we're looking at human capital, so the skills, knowledge, and health of people, but we're also interested in social capital. So the connections, the relationships between people that actually make all of this function effectively. So key features of our measurement approach, we're focusing on people, not just the economic system. So we're trying to look for indicators that capture people's experiences of their lives, not the economy on aggregate. We're interested in showing the diversity of experience, and in particular, we try and always make sure that we're reporting on inequalities, not just averages. So we care about the average level, but we also care about how these different sort of goods, if you like, are distributed in society. So wherever we can, we break down our data by gender, by age, by income level, by education level. So we try and capture the different experiences within different groups of the population. We have an emphasis on objective conditions. So a lot of our measures are objective measures. But we also have subjective measures in there because you can't talk about people's experiences of life without actually asking them about their experiences. So self-report data is a crucial component of our framework. It's not the only thing that's in there, but we recognize that it's essential to ask people how they're doing, and that involves looking at their happiness and their subjective well-being. As I said before, it's concerned with well-being both today and tomorrow. And importantly, what we're doing here is trying to develop a list of ingredients for a good life rather than necessarily a prescriptive recipe. I think this is important because I think we have to recognize, and again, we've heard it a little bit today, that different people might have different definitions and different ways of thinking about what happiness means to them. So we need to recognize that these different ingredients might be combined differently by different people. Nonetheless, the OECD very frequently gets asked for a single indicator of well-being or happiness. We are very frequently asked, what's the happiest country? What's the most sustainable country? We know that country rankings are terribly popular. But this is really difficult stuff because it means deciding whether, for example, health is better than education or deciding whether safety matters more than happiness. That's not a decision that it's safe to leave in the hands of policy analysts or economists or psychologists, philosophers or politicians. It has to be an open dialogue. So what was the OECD's solution to this issue of needing a single number? Well, we built a website where people can decide for themselves what makes for a good life. So it's called the Better Life Index, and you can see there's a link to the web address there. Just talking you through it a little bit, broadly, when you arrive at the website, you get offered this dashboard. And the idea is that on this interactive toolbar, you can move the cursor to show how important the different topics in our framework are to you as an individual. So there's then an algorithm that combines the weights that the website users provide us with to give you that all sought after country ranking. So at the end of the day, you do get a rank, but it's not one that the OECD decides. Our data drives it, but the people visiting our website are actually determining what formula goes into the generation of that rank. So instead of showing you an Excel spreadsheet of data, and those are available if that's your thing, we also provide those. But instead of that, here we show you flowers. And the height of the stem of the flowers is an overall summary of the well-being that you get as a result of filling in your ranking. And then the size of the different petals on the flower tell you the scores on each dimension of well-being. So we have a fancy color coding system for anyone who is interested. So what do people say matters most to them? Well, we launched the website in 2011, and since then we've had 9.5 million visitors to the site. We don't automatically collect ranking information whenever people are just playing with the tool on our site. So we don't automatically pull in that data. But people have the option to share their index with the OECD if they want to. And we've got about 120,000 indices now that have been built and that people have shared with us. So that gives us a little bit of information about what people in different countries are feeling is mattering most to them. What's the headline message here? Well, the phrase we tend to use is that people want to be healthy, happy, and wise. The three sort of top scoring dimensions in our framework are health, life satisfaction, and education. But I think the other takeaway message from this exercise for us is that there isn't a single dimension that people say is totally unimportant. They all count. So the red line on this chart is the score that you would get if everybody was rating every dimension perfectly equally. So there are differences in people's ratings, but on the whole, almost every dimension attracts some interest from everybody. So I'm from the Statistics Directorate. I have to tell you there are some big caveats about using this kind of data. The first one is we have not by any stretch got a representative sample of people visiting our website. We know it takes a special kind of person to visit the OECD website. We only have it in 7 different languages. We're only attracting certain groups of society. We tend to have more men than women visit the site. We tend to have more younger people than older people visit the site. So there are things we can measure that we know are biased in this sample, but there's an awful lot of things that we can't measure that also tell us this is an unusual group of people who are sharing their views with us. But nonetheless, it's kind of interesting. The other thing we do actually on the website is that you can see how people in different countries are ranking the different dimensions. Again, bearing in mind these are not representative samples, but in both the USA, Canada, and Mexico, we've actually got quite sizable numbers of people sharing their index with us. So we've got over 6,000 people in Canada and Mexico, and in the US we've got over, I think, about 20,000 people responding. Again, this idea that people want to be healthy, happy, and wise seems to come through very strongly. So in all 3 countries, we've got life satisfaction, health, and education coming out towards the top. It's interesting that we've got a slight difference between Mexico, Canada, and the United States in terms of what comes out right at the top. So in Mexico, we see education as being the most highly valued. In Canada, it's health. And in the United States, it's subjective well-being, life satisfaction, or happiness. So it seems appropriate that we're here. Further down the rankings, we often see that work-life balance and safety are quite important across these countries. And then down sort of towards the end of the rankings, we do see some differences, but on the whole, there's a lot of similarity. And again, we see this right across the OECD. There's a lot of similarity in the way that people are ranking these different dimensions. So how do OECD countries measure up? Well, the Better Life Index that I've just been showing you is meant to be a fun introduction to our work. It's meant to be an accessible way to understand what we do. But there's an awful lot that happens behind the scenes. And for a much more in-depth look at how we measure well-being and actually how life is going in the OECD, we produce a book every 2 years, and that book is called How's Life? So we're busy at the moment actually writing the 2017 edition. What I've shown you here is the 2015 edition. And what we do every time we produce this book is actually go through dimension by dimension, indicator by indicator, how are people doing in OECD countries, how is life in the OECD. We also look at how well-being is distributed in these countries and also how it's changing over time. We've got another section that looks at these resources for future well-being and the extent to which countries are providing the necessary investment in those resources. And then we tend to have special focuses. Each year we produce the book, we have a different sort of set of special chapters. And in 2015, we had a special focus on the lives of children. So how's life for children, applying our framework at the child level. We had a special focus on volunteering and well-being. So both what's the relationship between volunteering and well-being, but also who benefits. And one of the things we find is that actually volunteering is associated with higher well-being for the individuals who volunteer as well as the people that they help. And we also had a special focus on measuring well-being in regions, so looking within a country at regional disparities in well-being. Now, in the time available, I can't possibly show you all of the results, but I can't also leave without showing you any data at all. So I've got a picture here of the relative performance of the United States on current well-being and how we define current well-being. So one of the strong messages that comes across from all of the work that we've been doing is that every OECD country has some room to improve in terms of people's well-being. There isn't a single OECD country, even Norway, even Sweden, even Switzerland, that does amazingly well across all of our measures. Every country has areas of strength and areas of weakness. So for the USA, we can see some areas of comparative strength. So this is how the US is doing relative to other OECD countries. So this chart actually shows if there's a long bar, that means that it's an area of relative strength for the country. If it's a short bar, that means it's an area of relative weakness. So in the USA, we can see things like household income, financial wealth, earnings, and also stakeholder engagement in government activity. Those are all high-scoring areas for the US. Areas of less good performance, comparatively speaking, in the US include work-life balance indicators, so both the proportion of people working long hours, and we define that as regularly working more than 50 hours a week, and also time off, which is time spent on leisure and personal care. Those are both relative weaknesses for the US. Also life expectancy, which is in contrast to strong scores on perceived health in the US, life expectancy is well below the OECD average in the US. Also, homicide rates in the US are much higher than the OECD average. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of sort of some of the things that we do with the data, but it's a snapshot only. And I would say anyone who's interested, talk to me and I can provide you with a copy of the book. Why do this? Again, I think it's really important to emphasize why this matters. I don't think it's enough to just say, we're right, happiness is the answer, well-being is the answer. I think we actually need to demonstrate what you can do with this data and why it will actually make a difference. So what are the advantages of this approach? One issue is it's offering a more complete picture of progress. So we're trying to capture aspects of life that often aren't represented in policy. That includes things like social connections and work-life balance, but also subjective well-being and happiness. We think it can help to support the strategic alignment of outcomes across government. So by clarifying what it is you're aiming for, what it is you think matters, can actually help different government departments come together on an agreement about what they're trying to achieve. And at the very least, it provides us with a checklist that all government departments should be using when they're thinking about the impact of their policy. They're not just thinking in terms of, oh, I'm the health department, so I'm going to think about health. We're actually saying you need to think about the whole of your well-being impact. So my slide has slipped a little bit, but that's meant to say highlighting the diversity of experience at a granular and people-centered level. So this might sound like a bit of an oxymoron, but we're looking for statistics that people can relate to. We're trying to find ways of communicating about how life is going for people. And I think in this sort of post-truth era that we're in at the moment, it's even more important that we're thinking about how we communicate, but also how we listen to people in terms of what they say matters for them. And finally, as I've mentioned before, it's a forward-looking framework. So we're not just looking at happiness here and now. We are trying to also capture the resources that matter for people's well-being in the future. Again, I'm from the Statistics Directorate, and we're trying to be the change we want to see. And that means trying to improve the availability of data. It's really important that we try and give policymakers the best possible evidence we can. So I've highlighted a couple of different publications here. Probably the most interesting for people in this room is the work that we've done on measuring subjective well-being. So back in 2013, we produced some guidelines on measuring subjective well-being. These were designed with national statistical offices in mind, and we've now reached a situation where 34 out of 35 OECD member countries are collecting data on subjective well-being in their national statistics. This is a radical change from how the situation was even just 5 years ago. So there's impact that we're able to have by explaining how you go about measuring these concepts. You can actually start to make a difference in the flow through of evidence that will eventually reach policy, but we are still in the early stages. A couple of things that we're also doing that will be coming out in 2017, we're actually producing some guidelines on how you measure trust. Again, we've heard a little bit today about the interest in measuring trust. That's a very challenging concept, but we've been doing some work to sort of identify a statistical framework so that you can actually go out and try and measure these things. And also maybe of interest is work that we're doing on measuring the quality of the work environment, because people spend an awful lot of their waking hours at work, and so well-being at work is a crucial determinant of well-being in the rest of life. So quick conclusion, measuring what matters. To make happiness a policy goal, we need to define it and we need to measure it. And we can have different views on what that is and how we define it and measure it. But we need to be clear because we need to be able to hold people to account. If I make a promise to raise people's well-being, you need to know what I mean when I say that, and you need to be able to hold me to account for doing it. This necessarily means talking about what people value, and that can't just be decided by economists and statisticians or even just by data. I think one of the strong advantages of subjective well-being measures is that it is reflecting how people feel about their own lives. There is no judgment there. There is no framework imposed by the OECD on what makes your life good. It's an individual's assessment of their own life. So that's a key strength for those measures. As I said before, the OECD well-being framework is a list of ingredients. It's not a prescriptive recipe. It's about making choices and trade-offs in policy more explicit, and it's about trying to generate a more open debate about what matters most and how we achieve it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's nice to see a passionate statistician for a change. Thank you. You seem to have some notes as well.
I think we all have presentations.
Okay, well, then go ahead.
That's not fair.
Is there an opportunity for questions?
I think we usually do questions after the presentations, I think.
Afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's how the pattern has been. So, while they're queuing my presentation, let's practice some happiness. And there's all kinds of ways that we can do that. I'll bet you're feeling tired right now, right? How about if we take 3 deep breaths together? One more. And I'd love it if you'd cue up my presentation. And while you're doing that, my good friend Zoe and Mario, are you here? And Jenny are passing out of some paper. And I'm going to take some risks with this presentation, so I hope that you appreciate failure in public. So the project that I've been working on is called the Happiness Alliance, and I've been asked to talk about a new paradigm. And so what I'd like to do is, with you, to experience what is a new paradigm. So you have this piece of paper, and please write down your ideas. At the end, we'll collect them. We'll take pictures of each one of them, of your ideas. You'll have access to that, and then we'll collate them and provide that back to you. So that's sort of the outcome. All right, there's my presentation. So I'm so honored. Thank you so much for being here. Now, to give ourselves a little energy, let's give a really, I know we did this once, but let's give a really big, huge shout out to Luis and to Damien, yeah? Thank you. And thank you everybody for being here right now. I talked about taking a risk, and I want to sort of set the context of what that risk is. We've heard a lot about what is coming in our world. We've heard from Laird, he talked about how we need 1,000 interventions, right? We need 1,000 examples. We're the ones that get to create that. And we may doubt that we can, right? We're like, can we do this? They need, the policymakers, they need the evidence, right? And the issue of whether or not we can measure happiness has been settled by the OECD. Thank you so much. And yet still, how many of you here are from the happiness movement? How many of you who are working in the happiness movement? And how many for you here, this is a new thing? All right, just a few of you. So when you know that when you go out and talk about happiness to a group other than this group, the first thing that you get is, you can't measure happiness, right? So there's a lot of work that we need to do in this field. So let's do this together. And when you doubt whether or not you can do it, here's what I do. I remember that 250 years ago, before we had the Industrial Revolution, things were very different. Because of the Industrial Revolution, because of that singular focus on economic growth, and it is encapsulated by the measurement of GDP, we have changed the face of our Earth. We have even changed what it means to be a human. We can do this. We can do this again. And so with this presentation, I'm hoping to experiment a little bit on how to do this and how we'll do this. So I mentioned the project that I'm working on. Some of you have heard of the Happiness Alliance. It was referred to earlier as the Happiness Initiative because it came out of Sustainable Seattle. Have any of you heard of the Happiness Alliance? Any of you taken the Gross National Happiness Index, the happiness index that we provide? Any of you? So this is a deeply grassroots, community-driven project. If tonight you want to experience a happiness index, go to happycounts.org. You can take our happiness index, which is based on Bhutan's. It was Grace of Bhutan and Karma Ura from the Gross National Happiness Commission that we are able to provide this happiness index, which we've been providing to communities all over the world since 2010 is when we started working on this, and then 2011, January, is when we first issued this. So I mentioned this piece of grassroots activism because in terms of the idea of a new economic paradigm, in terms of the idea of a new social, governmental, and personal paradigm, certainly we need the top down, right? We need the conditions of happiness. And we also need the bottom up. And that's the work that we've been doing, is working with communities all across the world, as well as providing tools and resources for individual happiness, and then also for community building. And that's all online and it's all free. We also provide data. So I was just so we had about 70,000 people have taken our index, our happiness index, and I was just in Dubai, invited to the Dialogue for Global Happiness because, in part, I believe we provided our data to the Minister of Happiness, Oecd. I took a selfie because they're developing their happiness index. So you saw earlier in Smart to Buy, they have that 3-point scale. They're also developing a satisfaction with life and satisfaction with the conditions of life and a eudaimonia index. And I'm super excited about this. In Kuwait, we're working with our partner who works for the Minister of Communications, and I think it's the Interior. And I don't read Arabic, and unfortunately Dr. Binder isn't here. But what this says is that in Kuwait they will be measuring happiness for all of Kuwait by the government, and they'll be using our index. So this is super, super exciting. There's lots of other examples of this. You can go to the OECD Wiki Progress website for the Happiness Alliance, and you can read about some of them. So that's a little bit about the work that we're doing. So the takeaway from this is that the happiness index, which is that subjective measure of well-being based on Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, it's internally and externally validated. You can use it. Your students can use it. You can use it at any level. It's freely available and translated into many different languages. I want to show you sort of an idea of how we're trying to explain what we're working on, and I'll tell you a little bit about where this comes from, and this is also on this piece of paper that I gave you, or that Mario, the wonderful Mario, who you should all know who Mario Chamorro is, been working in the happiness movement also, and Zoe Munster handed out. In 2012, I had the great honor of being invited to participate in the high-level meeting, Wellbeing and Happiness Towards a New Economic Paradigm. And then that's where I met Mario, in the Civil Society Working Group. And after that, the year after that, Bhutan, Karma Ura, and the Gross National Happiness Commission brought together about 45 of sort of the leaders in the happiness, subjective well-being, and sustainability movement, including a colleague of mine who I work with at the Happiness Alliance, to create a blueprint for gross national happiness. From that, Gio Vannini, anybody here friends with Gio Vannini, Enrico Vannini, from the Italian government? He created this, what he called this way of understanding the paradigm and the paradigm shift. And so we've been continuing to work with this, and I'm just going to present this to you. And on this piece of paper that you have in your hands, if you have ideas about this is very much a working model to try to understand how it is that basic needs that we share with all other beings, right? Those needs for food, those needs for just a basic sense of safety, right? You back anything into a corner, it's going to attack. So those basic needs of safety and our need for shelter, how it is that those fit in with the happiness movement, with this new paradigm, and how is it that human needs fit in. So those, we've heard repeatedly about our needs for being our truly integrated selves, our needs for self-actualization, our needs for community, and for feeling a part of something bigger than ourselves and feeling like we're making a difference in that. So how do those fit in with this paradigm? And what is the role of measures? And what is what are the different ways that we can use objective and subjective measures like they do in Bhutan, right? This is an amazing work that they're doing in Bhutan, of really pairing together the objective and the subjective measures, and how can those inform both what the basic role of government is, and then how can they inform how we develop the policies that then support people to be able to develop their own happiness skills and really put value on using the happiness tools that we all know. So that breath, those 3 breaths, or whatever your practice is to bring about more compassion for yourself and for others, those skills of gratitude and of giving. So I'm not going to go too much more into this because now I want to do a little thought experiment with you. But this is very much a work in progress. I mentioned that we're super grassroots and really, we're called the Happiness Alliance because we're really interested in working with you on any level that you're open to that. So with your permission, I'll do a little thought experiment. Anybody object? All right. What if I said to you, just do, what would you say? How, would you finish that phrase? Just do, what do you say? Huh? Just do it, right? Just do it, right? And what comes up? The Nike swoosh, it's like a whole bunch of branding comes up, right? What if instead, when I was going to say that, I said, just do nothing? And it was with the same association that you have, the same kind of branding, the same kind of product delivery. Well, 200 and some years ago, Thomas Jefferson, now he is a lawyer and I also am a lawyer, so I can tell you that when a lawyer writes down words, they have specific meaning, right? You don't use words clumsily. When Thomas Jefferson wrote down that the purpose of government is to secure all people's, he said men, but all people's inalienable right to life, liberty, and pursuit of, he wrote pursuit of property, because that was the term of art. And he scratched that out, and he wrote happiness. He wrote pursuit of property. That was the term of art, was the pursuit of property. And he scratched it out, and he wrote happiness. And we all know that when he was talking about happiness, he was talking about eudaimonia, right? Eu means good, daimon means spirit, means being. He was talking about being a part of society. He was talking about fully actualizing, fully being yourself, and really having that sense of that life, this is a good life, because I am doing good. And at this point, we can see that we missed the opportunity. And we're at the cusp. We're right there with this movement. So now, we heard Laird talk about how we need 1,000 interventions. Many of you have read the World Happiness Reports. You've read about the interventions that are needed. You've heard, perhaps at the 2012 meeting, if you were there, you heard Laura Morea, the president of Costa Rica, talk about why they have the Happy Planet Index highest rating, that they took all of their funding from their defense and they put it into education and social support and keeping parks. You know about Bhutan, you know about the amazing work that Bhutan is doing, where gross national happiness is in every single one of their public policies. You can actually go online and see that. We know about Ecuador, where they have nature's rights written into the Constitution. We have enough examples of this, and yet we don't. So let's come up with some of these examples, and that's where I've got that little piece of paper. So I'll take you through a little bit of reorienting your thinking. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Are you awake? The answer is yes. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And close your eyes if you sleep if you want. Close your eyes, please. Or don't. Are you awake? If your answer is yes, who is awake? In a moment, I'll ask you to open your eyes. And when you do, don't open them yet, but when you do, just simply please notice that you're seeing. So open your eyes. Are you awake? So if your answer is yes, what is it that is aware that you are awake? When we have this paradigm shift, being awake will have a whole different meaning. I believe that we will be able to see the truth as it really is, that we will all be beings who are compassionate, who are wise, who are curious about ourselves, about our surroundings, who take wise action, who are joyful and balanced, have lots of energy to do the work that we need to do, and are able to focus on that work. And that's our work now, because right now, you and I are that movement. And I do believe that the greatest intervention that we can take is, yes, to be awake, and yes, to do the work, to do the wise work. And so I really, really am asking you to write down your ideas on that piece of paper, because it's you. We know this, it's you who is going to do that work. And that, in my view, is the new paradigm. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's always good in a conference to be reawoken. And you have a presentation or speech?
Yes,
Okay.
but I'll cut it short.
Sure.
We have been talking about happiness in a pretty wide sense. In Bhutan, there's a lot of things called happiness. And, the flowers of Oecd have a lot of leaves. I will talk about happiness in the more limited sense of life satisfaction, and I will try to say more about that. A short overview of development of happiness research. Well, that's very successful. We are creating a heap of findings. That heap is too big to oversee, and to get a better view, we have the World Database of Happiness. First, just an overview of the development. In the beginning, some stray studies among students, about 1 or 2 every 10 years. But then come the first public opinion polls in the 1950s, studies on marriage happiness, adjustment to old age. And then in the 1960s, the start of the social indicator movement, and the moment that we saw that wealth is not everything, that we should also look at social indicators. Then in that strand, happiness research develops, and since 2000 we have also happiness economics. Well, as I said, that produces a pile of studies. Here you see the stray studies, but here it starts, and now we are about here, which means that every year, so this year, we will have some 600 publications on happiness, some 600 scientific publications on happiness. Well, that's an awful heap, and we lose sight on what is actually being discovered. The problems, not only it's too much, but also there's conceptual confusion. The more accepted happiness becomes, the more people start calling their subject happiness. And one of the things is, for instance, we used to talk about mental health, about positive mental health. Today we call it happiness, sometimes eudaimonic happiness. And so the success creates confusion. And what's more, in all these scientific studies, well, they are produced in different languages. In the beginning it was mostly English, but now the Chinese are also entering the scene. Well, difficult to read their works. And even if you could read it, there is the problem that there is difference in technical language. Even concepts such as a mean or a correlation have different names in different scientific articles. So if you want to see what the state of happiness research is, you get lost. Well, how can we solve that? Well, it's a new technique, and the technique is called a findings archive. And we have data archives in which results of surveys are stored. We have bibliographies in which publications are stored, but we didn't have yet findings archives in which specific empirical observations are described in a similar manner and put in a database. Well, the first such findings archive is the World Database of Happiness. And I see that some people have a mobile phone. Well, go here and then you will see how it works. Just some slide dumps. What you see here is, well, a historical moment, because you were probably one of the last to see this. This is the website as it was designed in the 1990s. We are now making a more modern, flashy website, but you know what happens if you build a new website. You get problems and delay, but the new site is almost ready. What you cannot see here in the presentation is how much is in it, because that is right behind the curtain. But I can tell you that even if, well, it looks a bit old-fashioned, the content is quite modern, and there are some 25,000 findings in it. And what kind of findings are there in? Well, there are distributional findings, and that is how happiness is distributed in a particular time and place. And for instance, how many happy and unhappy people lived in Miami in, say, 1962. And, well, we have that for nations. I'll show you some pictures, and we also have it for publics, for elderly people, for teachers. There is distributional findings. There's also findings on things that go together with happiness, which are called correlational findings. And for instance, think of the study in Miami in 1962. Not only did such a study produce a distribution of happiness at that time, but typically also correlations. And what was the correlation with ethnicity? What was the correlation with income? Well, these findings are described in a uniform technical jargon in which all the terms are defined and presented on electronic pages which are full of links. And so you can find them. And actually this findings archive, well, is a pile of 25,000 pages which describe research findings in a systematic way. Of course, this draws on publications, because you first need a publication to take the data out. And, and the list of publications, and the bibliography is also has a subject classification. And, well, here's a description. Of course, if you select findings on life satisfaction, well, you cannot accept everything that says to measure life satisfaction. And so all the measures used are screened. And do they really measure what we defined, or do they measure something else, even if they call it life satisfaction? Well, there is a list of measures of happiness, and these measures are coded, And then we go to the distributional findings. Well, and we have distributional findings in nations. I'll give you an example of how that is presented. That is distributional findings in Denmark. You see here the longest time range. And interestingly, you see here that in the happiest country of the world, happiness is still rising, which is, well, a nice promise for less happy countries. You see here also how Denmark ranks on average happiness between the best and the worst. Well, Costa Rica had one survey where they performed a bit better, but Denmark is very close to the top. You can also compute happy life years, what we discussed this morning. You can look at the inequality of happiness, actually the standard deviation, and you can combine the average and the standard deviation in what is called inequality adjusted happiness. So in one view, you have detail about happiness in this particular country, and we have such pictures for almost all countries of the world. Behind this is detail of each of these data points. And if you click, for instance, on that information button, you get detail, and there is also detail about correlational findings in Denmark, and you see that there's quite a lot of subjects. Here you see how many correlational findings are in Denmark, and here you see how many correlational findings there are on that subject in the whole world. So if you are, well, a data cruncher, this is paradise. Well, this is an overview of happiness in publics in Denmark. And here is a picture of a correlational finding, in this case, the relationship between happiness and age. There are two age groups. There is this measure of happiness. There's a very simple statistic, a difference in the percentage. And you see that in this case, and where was it? Yeah, this was university students in Switzerland, that the elderly students were a bit less happy. But this is just one example of the other 20,000. I think this is enough. You have the website, and enjoy.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess we have more than one passionate statistician on the panel. So I'd like to open it up. I think we've got enough time for maybe 2 questions. And rather than have my brilliant questions, I thought I'd have somebody else.
Thank you all for your presentation. I want to ask the 4 of you about the paradox of well-being and happiness and the housing development bonanza that it's across the country with gentrification of all sorts of neighborhoods from Miami to Los Angeles. There's a big movement of activists opposing this gentrification and opposing this densification of cities as they become more urban and more stressful to live in. But at the same time, there's this movement of well-being and happiness. Can you elaborate and speak on this paradox? Thank you.
Anybody volunteer to take that?
I'll start. I don't mind starting. If you look at the 2010 data for Bhutan, you'll look at objective data, and there'll be a question that says, question of objective data asks for household median income, and it's by area. And then if you look at the subjective data, it says, do you feel like you're able to meet your needs? In Thimphu, scores highest in both. And then there's another city, Gaza, which doesn't score that high. I mean, Thimphu is way higher than everybody else. Doesn't score that high in average income. And yet, in being able to meet their needs, they're as high as Thimphu. So this kind of question raised around meeting your household needs, meeting your social support needs, looking at objective and subjective, and getting the information about what is going right in areas where they don't necessarily have the objective measure that jives with the subjective is probably, in my view, what this field is saying, is this is one of the areas to look at for those answers. There's really important questions that need to be asked about what's happening in Gaza. And once again, this is where Bhutan is, it's really a country to look at.
Thank you.
Mark.
If I may add.
Sure, you can.
If I may add to that, in the rural life and urban life, there is a big shift in terms of how you manage your time. Because in the urban life, you're more greedy, you're doing much more to earn than in rural life, where you're much more in connection with the community, living with those values there. In fact, Adam was explaining that, gentleman sitting there to me, when he visited Bhutan, he saw people just sitting outside and chatting, and he wondered, why are these people not working, It's basically how you divide your time. In urban areas, I was doing a study for India with a life expectancy of 72 years, and I found out that they sleep for 28 years, chase for more and more for 10 years. They're busy behind social media for 9 years of their lifetime. 6 years of their lifetime, they're busy how they educate and groom themselves. 4 years of their lifetime, they're busy eating and drinking. 6 years of their lifetime, they're busy doing house chorus, actually. And 2 years of their lifetime, they're busy commuting. 2 years, they're busy shopping. When you combine all this, you're left with 5 to 9 years of a lifetime. And when you ask, what do you do there? Then you realize suddenly, oh, it's time to now, retire. You're sick, you want to live longer, you want to live well. So now you run behind a doctor, spending all that you have earned in that 10 years chasing for more and more. And that's how the urban life lives, So we need to retrace back and think differently our living patterns. And we should not wait for that long to say, oh, I'm old now, I have not lived my life. So let's live today, forget the yesterday, and let's look forward to tomorrow in a different way.
I'm no expert on gentrification. What I can say is that access to decent housing is definitely something that matters to people. In our framework, we measure it 3 different ways, and some of those might be interesting to you. The first one is access to basic sanitation. So do you have access to a flushing toilet in your household? The second is a measure of housing overcrowding, which maybe speaks to some of the issues that you're recognizing. And then the third one is around housing affordability. So what proportion of your disposable income do you have to spend in order to keep a roof over your head for you and your family? So those are the 3 different ways that we try and look at sort of the quality of housing people have access to. Those are measures that we can look at across most of our 35 OECD member countries. Within an individual country, within an individual city, there's a lot more that you can do.
Yeah, how about one more question?
Yes,
Take it.
Sorry to interrupt, Laura. I just wanted to actually pay tribute to what I think we've just seen in this session here. By the way, I really enjoyed drawing my happiness vision. Thank you for that opportunity. But it strikes me that what I ended up drawing was a bit like what we've seen represented on the stage here. So in Bhutan, we have this fantastic example of a country showing sort of nationwide leadership in putting the things that matter first. In Ruut, in your work for many years, we've seen kind of the need to base this on evidence and research and kind of really inform what we do based on science. In Laura, a lovely example of people and communities really making a difference and how you've sort of spread that globally, and that's fantastic. But I think actually what's perhaps even most exciting of all is to hear the perspective from the OECD here, because I'm sure you all recognise this with me here, but I think there's something really profound is happening here, because all of us, I think, here would recognise that back in the 1930s, I think it was, the OECD, and in that period since then, has played a huge role in GDP becoming this measure of progress that we've had globally. And I think it's really exciting for all of us to see that the OECD is taking really seriously this move towards measuring more than just the economic factors. So I think this is a real sign of change and progress. So thank you to all of you on behalf of all of us for all that you've done. Thank you.
Well, I have a question.